I'm here with Cian Westmoreland. He is a US drone program whistleblower. He is an activist and he is an all-round amazing human being. I had the pleasure of interviewing him last year on Internet Party's Anti-Spy Bill series, and I'm very, very pleased to have him back here with me again. Hi, Cian.
Hello.
So, Cian, you've joined us to talk about Julian Assange, his situation, and the importance and significance of WikiLeaks and their contribution to the world. Could you tell us from your experience when you first became aware of their work and what attracted you to them? Why do you support them?
Well, so 2010, when they first started coming out with stuff in April, I was just getting out of the military. 6 months prior, I was in Afghanistan, witnessing things that were very similar to what was shown in the collateral murder video, only, different situations, not journalists, but still questionable in terms of, whether or not they were innocent or guilty. And so I was getting out of the military in April, and funnily enough, I just found out about them through an email through our military system, that if we were to go to WikiLeaks or anything like the intercepts, it was noticed that it would be found out. So it was, of course, that piqued my curiosity, but I was getting out of the military during that time, and I was just kind of focused on hitchhiking around the world, which is what I did right after. And then the next point I heard of them was when I started going to college in Brussels, and I was in my intro to international relations class, and the topic was the Geneva Convention. My professor turns the lights off and he proceeds to show us this video of the two Reuters journalists that were killed. And I'm sitting there watching it, and it's like, this isn't the first time I've seen something like this. And I'm in this classroom with students from about 30 different nations, and I'm looking at all of their faces, and there's some people who've probably never been exposed to something like that. There's a couple that looked like they were highly disturbed by it. And then he flips the lights back on and he asks the class what was wrong with this video. And the whole class was silent. He knew that I was in the military, so he didn't know anything about what I did. But he pointed to me and he's like, "Cian, you were military. What was wrong with this video?" And I was like, well, I mean, this is obviously a mistake. It could have really happened to anybody who was performing, a job like that. Most of the people are sleep deprived. If they're, looking at these like things that were cameras, they could be mistaken as weapons. They were in an area that was an area of active hostility. And I proceeded to explain the rationale of how this could happen. He kind of looks at me, he's like, "Well, I never really thought about that, but what about the Geneva Convention?" And, there was a moment of, I guess, sort of, I felt humbled, and I felt also just kind of ashamed that I didn't say anything about that. But in a war zone where people are shooting people, like the rules that academics like to throw out there kind of go out the window. I mean, so, I mean, it was kind of a catalyzing moment for me, I think, because, you know, here I am sitting in this classroom with students who did not share my ideological background, who, you know, weren't brought up to be in the military. Like, my whole family was military, and that's really all we know. And, like, you know, 7% of the U.S. population, you know, has ever had an association with the military. So it's a very kind of insular community, with sort of, you know, a narrow view of the world in their own way. Their main preoccupation is with security, and, you know, the questions about whether or not that security is, you know, like the things that we were doing over there were justified or not weren't really for us to question. We were just supposed to follow the orders, and, you know, if, of course, if it went against the you know, the law of war to the extent that we knew, of course, the first reaction isn't to report it, because, you know, a commander is trying to protect their people. You know, they feel empathy for, you know, people when they make mistakes, and it's just kind of a sort of paternal reaction, but it didn't really satisfy me, and, you know, there was always gnawing questions in the back of my mind that, you know, maybe these people that happened to show up on this piece of paper that I got at the end of my tour saying that I assisted in, you know, all of these enemy kills, you know, quote unquote, were, like, I didn't know who they were. And I think, you know, you have a lot of people in that position in the military, is like, they just don't know what they're responsible for. And I mean, I started looking deeper into it, and, you know, of course, this was during a time when the, you know, the Arab uprising was kicking off and everything, and, you know, I started kind of seeing, you know, how WikiLeaks was affecting the politics of those regions. Like, for instance, with Tunisia and Ben Ali, like, I mean, I would say that Tunisia is probably better off now than they were under him, and that's, you know, partially thanks to WikiLeaks showing the population there that, you know, the U.S. wasn't going to retaliate if they were to overthrow them. And I learned, you know, that the relationship with, you know, Europe and the U.S., between, you know, these countries in Northern Africa and the Middle East, were, you know, primarily oriented around stability and not democracy. And, you know, in a way, like, just by having these relationships with these leaders, it actually, you know, undermines their democratic process. So, I mean, of course, there was a lot of, you know, of course, with any information could be used in, you know, an assortment of ways, but fundamentally, I think, you know, in the grander scheme of history, you know, much like Daniel Ellsberg and his you know, publication of the My Lai massacre, like, history is not going to look favorably on those people who do everything they can to hide their crimes. I mean, the cat's out of the bag now, and yeah.
Do you think that WikiLeaks release, particularly of the collateral murder video, did that allow US military servicemen and women to see what was being done in a different light than if they were watching it while they were participating in it?
Yeah, I think so, because if you're in the military, you're mostly exposed to what you're doing. There's this whole thing about need to know, and it's not like a commander to like take that video and post it around their email chain saying this is what we're not supposed to do. Like, that never happens. The only videos we see are like acts of bombing quote unquote enemies, to the tune of heavy metal music to pump us up. And from a military perspective, you don't want people questioning. You don't want people questioning, because when people start hesitating, then the risk of dying is higher. So a commander's responsibility is to protect their troops before anything else. And I think that that mentality can create its own sort of perversions. But
Cian, there is a huge amount of support for you right now in the chat. There are people reflecting that they can see you reliving your experiences as you have this conversation, and they see you looking down because you are not proud of what you did and what you're involved in. But what you are doing right now, you should absolutely be proud of, and the way that you've spoken out, the activism that you do, and the truth that you share with the world. So please raise your head a little bit and look into the camera, because there are some amazing people watching you right now that are expressing a lot of love for you and a lot of support for you and a lot of gratitude. They're saying right now, we love you, lots of love to you, Cian, sending love to you. People really respect what you're doing by speaking out. So please know that love and that support is here and it's coming your way. So Cian, given Julian's situation right now, he can't speak to anyone, he can't communicate with the outside world. His doctors are telling us that he is facing a mortal threat inside the embassy. How do you feel about that there is a journalist and a publisher who, as WikiLeaks put it today, is a slow motion assassination, and it's happening in a Western country and in full view of the world? What's your thoughts on that?
I mean, I don't know if you've heard some of the news in the U.S., but I mean, you have radical right-wing people actually killing journalists now. Like I think it was in Maryland where that just happened. It's a slippery slope. Like, I see what Julian did as journalism in an environment where the media has failed to produce journalism. And at the same time, yeah, I mean, he influenced politics in major ways. I can't say that I like 100% agree with everything that he's ever said, because I'm a human and he's a human. But fundamentally, I don't think the U.S. has, grounds, or I don't even think it's strategically beneficial to them to go after Julian, because I mean, in terms of power, there's always two sides of the coin. There's the carrot and the stick, and right now the U.S. is not providing a very attractive carrot. What they kind of had going for them is there was a bit of plurality in their quote, like, supposed freedom of the press. but it's been undermined in a lot of ways. I think, in terms of people going to jail, like I believe that Chelsea Manning did. She was very brave in what she did, and morally brave from a military perspective. Of course, what she did has to be punished because the military is an organization that is held together by fear, obedience, and and you don't want people stepping out of the line. So like we've seen with a fellow person who is in the drone program, Reality Winner. I mean, she leaked a document. She pled guilty to doing that. It was just one document, but it was a document that shouldn't have been classified in the first place. Yet they needed somebody to nail to the wall to instill the fear in the ranks of the military, so that they knew that there was repercussions for leaking. You can't have an effective military if everybody is leaking everything. So I see it from that perspective. But I think when you don't have transparency, even at the lowest level, you get atrocities, and we need to, as citizens, be vigilant to that, and we need to ensure that our countries are behaving in ways that are congruent with our own ethics and morals. So what Julian did is, emblematic of what a good citizen would do, as far as what I saw.
And you talk about the way that the mainstream media has let down journalism and the cause of journalism. As a drone whistleblower, how important has it been for you, the independent media sources that have carried your messages?
It's been incredibly important. My message isn't one that's really it doesn't help the arms contractors case very much. It doesn't, it's not good for business. I know we have a new media face as far as the drone program goes. His name is Brett Velikovich, and he goes on Fox News all the time, and he just talks about how great drones are and what they can be used for, and how he's using them to help the Somalis fight extremism and saving the elephants. And they're trying to create good PR messages around these a program that they don't want people to understand the true nature of. Because the true nature of it is very similar to something that you would perhaps read in, the book by Hannah Arendt. I mean, the banality of evil, the distribution of responsibilities, so that everybody is seeing their own narrow purview to what's going on. There isn't engagement with the actual policies of what we're doing from the military level. The military's job is to create security, security wherever they go. And what that means is not necessarily security for the population first, it's security for them. But when you go into another country, they don't understand, or that it's or maybe people do in a very cynical way, that there isn't, you can't liberate people at the barrel of the gun. It's a human to human interaction. It's an agreement between people, and having that kind of asymmetry isn't, it's not congruent with American values whatsoever, or what I grew up to believe it were American values.
So it seems like what you're telling me is that because of the compartmentalization, that the work of WikiLeaks and other independent media who do shed light on this and who do give voice to whistleblowers is actually providing even military service members and vets like yourself with a level of visibility into what's really going on that you may not have even had when you're on the job.
Yeah. And I mean, particularly in the way air warfare is fought now, it's very network based. So it requires people from, like military members and civilian contractors located all over the world to do their little worker bee jobs to produce the final result of targeting and killing somebody. And it's heavily reliant on because when they're looking for targets, they have different levels of doing that. I mean, you have drones like the Global Hawk, like flying over entire cityscapes. They've got algorithms like tracking all the vehicular traffic, looking for suspicious activity. But the problem is always in who's choosing the data points, who's the one who is, and it's a problem in Silicon Valley. I think Evgeny Morisov talks about it, this problem of solutionism. You have these very narrow solutions that work and they create replicable results. But I mean, fundamentally, you have people, in the US who don't know a goddamn thing about the cultures that they're programming, algorithms to search for targets, ultimately. They don't know anything about the country or the culture because they haven't lived there. I mean, they're looking at it through their own cultural lens. And I think and any time you're going to have occupying forces, you're going to have ignorant people who just don't give a fuck. They don't give a fuck about the culture that they're in. They'll they got tattoos that say infidel on them, or I think Brandon Bryan has talked about in his work center that you have people who are like tattooing every kill that they ever made. Military training is all about being able to dehumanize the other. Like, you view your own group as really the only people you can empathize with. Like, when I was in the Air Force, we were taught not to trust people out of our work center, even within the Air Force. So, otherization and the compartmentalization of not just the knowledge of the overall mission, but also human social interactions, I think really affect, the efficacy of anything that they're going to do through drones, because drones are fundamentally network dependent weapon systems. There's not a person sitting in there.
I remember last year when I spoke with you during Anti-Spyball series, we talked about how this technology, if it spreads, it was first one country and then 2, then 7, and now I think heading more towards a dozen that it's been employed in. But we talked specifically about how inevitably that technology comes home to US soil. And I think we are increasingly seeing that, even in the space of time. It's been probably 8 or 9 months since we had that conversation. We're now seeing drone deployments in and around the US increasingly. We've also seen the first deployment of drones with less lethal weaponry being used at protests, where they're now actually arming drones with tear gas and whatnot. How do you feel about that aspect of it? And do you think is this the point at which people will begin to wake up, when it actually becomes a real physical and local threat to them, no longer just on the other side of the planet?
I think so. Particularly now, like the U.S. is very divided, and I mean, what they're doing, what the ICE is doing right now, I mean, you're going to have one side of the aisle who, like, very uncritically, supports the ICE because we need to have strong borders, and we need to have, like, I mean, it was a debate that's, it's a lot more nuanced than, what the, I think the people who advocate that position are really, admitting to themselves. Because, I mean, whose fault is it that we have a drug war, like down in New Mexico, also New Mexico, but Mexico? I mean, you have cartels everywhere, disparate groups. Where did they get the weapons? The CIA has been down there for years, and I mean, and it's all about influence. It's about influence over the supply of these substances. It's about control of it, and I mean, we also have to ask ourselves, like, is it beneficial to the U.S. to have a divided Mexico? I don't know. Like, do you want a strong Latin country at your border with a unified front, like, particularly when you're trying to employ things like Trump is doing right now and talking about invading Venezuela?
So this is where we have people railing against the effects of what has been done. For example, the mass migration in Europe, but then we have the cause being the destabilization of Libya. Same thing as you're now describing with the South and Latin American countries. There's the cause and then there is the effect, and the public are railing against the effect but not addressing the cause. And yet WikiLeaks and Julian's work has been all about exposing the cause,
right?
The root causes.
Right. And the root cause is, like, you have the short and midterm aspects of politics, and then you have the long-term ones that are dictated by the civilizational control over resources. Because ultimately, what do material resources mean to a civilization? It means, that, like, I have money in my pocket to not only buy gas but also buy food. And the way our system is set up, it's not, it's not as efficient as it could be. So because of that inefficiency, there's an insatiable demand for more and more control. I think, these are problems that can be solved through, like, political restructuring rather than going to war for some rich CEO of Lockheed Martin or ExxonMobil to have their corner of the world, to their fiefdoms to control. I mean,
Cian, what is your message for Julian? We are hoping, we know he can't watch this live with us, but we're hoping that eventually he will be able to see it. I know he's very grateful for the support and advocacy of everybody who has joined this event. But what would you like to say to Julian?
that, you know, regardless of what happens, you know, he has fundamentally changed the world in a way that, you know, I think is beneficial in the long term, in the midterm, and that I think he deserves to be free, and I think regardless of what happens, you know, his work will carry on, and that they can't make him disappear.
Not so long as we are collectively his voice.
Right.
And I certainly hope that this event will continue to expand and grow as it has been over the last few months, and that ultimately we will be able to help Julian to get his communication back with the world, and that we will again hear his voice. Thank you so much for being here, Cian. I will be knocking on your door next month and asking you to come back for another hour, because there's so much more that I would like to talk to you about. But I deeply appreciate you being here, and I hope that you get a minute to go and have a look in the YouTube chat, because there are hundreds of supportive messages for you from vets and non-vets alike all around the world who are really touched by your participation.
Thank you for having me, and yeah.
You're so welcome.